Hi, everyone, and welcome to Breaking, Building, and Belonging. This next episode, episode 17, is called Players, Partners, and Possibilities. Um, the last episode was about my dad, Dipstick's dad's DJs, and my grandma Johnson as well. And what one of the things that we said at the end was that Dad did have friends that surrounded him his whole life, and he loved to play. And so that inspired this next chapter because I too learned how to find friends early in life and throughout life, and learned how that skill of playing even without my dad around for most of it. Um, and so this one starts with a quote. It is a happy talent to know how to play by Ralph Waldo Emerson. Um, as I open it up, I talk about how Kip helped me expand my horizons beyond the hopelessness of those middle school moments that we heard about in the earlier chapters. When I think back, I had other allies who lifted me up and taught me to trust, how to belong, and how to play, even amidst the chaos that was my early life. Each person who entered my life during those years, they played a part in helping me see the world differently. They were partners in exploration, even if only for a short time. Through my tired young eyes, uh, early in my childhood, I can remember tilting my head just slightly from the pillow and seeing this blur of motion where hours ago there had been a foot. Well, it was my childhood roommate's foot, to be exact. She had this anxious, frenetic energy that needed a release point. The foot vibrated at warp speed, sticking out from under the sheets at night. It was one of the methods that she used most often. Her podiatric pedaling helped externalize the ever present tension, otherwise trapped inside her creative and introverted mind and persona. She and I shared that room for a little while, a room that was shaped like an L for some strange construction mystery in the basement of my grandparents' home on Long Island. Her part of the room was a bit more like a room than my paneled in closet like part of the room. She even had a TV where we would watch late 1970s Mets and Reds play baseball. Well, when we weren't watching the Mets and Dodgers play baseball, that is. Her distinctly National League fandom had a bit more to do with how the players looked in their uniforms than my heroic idealization of the athletic prowess of the boys of summer. Still, we shared a deep love and affection for the sport for those few seasons and watched religiously. She took me to some live ball games at her high school as well. Somehow she and her best friend Bonnie and I made the trek, probably with my grandparents dropping us off at the football field or basketball stands. Ironically, we never went to a baseball game that I can remember. Inevitably, she would turn to me and say, "Just sit there and don't you dare move." The intensity of the look I received each time those words were uttered was far more terrifying than the words themselves. My aunt had a way of gritting her teeth and clenching her jaw and glaring at you, telling you, "Don't mess with me or I will take you out." Then, just as you were, you know what, your underoos, or maybe tidy whities, as in my case, underoos were kind of for the rich kids, she'd laugh in her trademark sweet, cover her mouth with her hands, cackle. Her eyes would sparkle at you with bottomless love, and you would be wondering, which emotion do I hang on to here as I try to will my little butt to glue itself to the bleachers? The fear of the razor sharp bite, or the protection of the lioness looking down at me? The love or the dread? The answer was always and will always be both. My math is fuzzy, but if we had been crammed into a cab when I was about 9 to make that one-way trek on the Greyhound down to Florida. I would have been, let's say, 7 or 8 when all this went down. So that meant that while Aunt Mig and Bonnie were trying to be normal teenagers, giggle about boys, and run the high school halls while the basketball game was going on, I must have been severely cramping their style. Each teenager was quite beautiful. My aunt was rail thin, with a trademark 70s flair and Italian locks that formed a bit of a fro. In contrast, Bonnie looked like someone straight out of the Brady Bunch, with straight brown hair and waspy cherub-like features. Although they probably did have the attention of some of the guys, I don't recall my aunt ever dating anyone until she moved to Florida. This duo was quite shy, if I recall, and they were not going to be on the homecoming court or voted most likely to date the football or basketball captain. It's a shame because they were hilarious and had boisterous personalities underneath their shy exteriors. I remember sitting in those stands and being scared to go to the high school bathroom. Who knows what was happening in there, smoking or drinking. I remember trying to focus on the game, whether basketball or football, but always being much more distracted by what Aunt Mig, as I called her, and Bonnie were up to. Were they safe? Did they find some boys to hang out with, or other girls? Each time they returned, the giggles were louder than when they left. Occasionally, my aunt would return in a bad mood. My modern day guess is that someone gave her a dirty look, or that the guy she liked was with another girl. When that happened, I always doubled on caution because one stray word could get me the trademark pinch that I would grow to dread my entire life. I would say something like, I like how you wrote Mrs. Lee Mazzilli, her favorite Met, all over your notebook. Is this how you will sign your checks after you get married? That's it. Get over here. You're getting a pinch. She had a way of pinching that put any high school bully's punch to shame. A precision attack, bone crushing in its intensity, yet somehow technically non-violent. These pinches were often done laughingly, using the same mixture of love and revenge. We laugh about them now, but I still dread getting one of those nasty ones if I am not careful and let my mouth write checks my aging skin can't cash. I mentioned my triplet sisters, who are 3 years younger than me. I grew up with them, and we'll talk about them next. But my first sister was not my sister biologically. It was my aunt. She was my big sister in every other way, the youngest of Mom's 3 siblings and only 8 years older than me. That's why she was a student in high school during these memories, and she must have been a junior or senior when we moved to Florida. Aunt Meg and I shared times that my sisters were too young to recall, times before the days of rental apartments, ramshackle tiny homes, and food stamps. To try and hone in on it more, she and I were, at various times, each other's person, as they call it nowadays, made famous by two best friends on the TV show Grey's Anatomy. Sometimes people don't have to become your person, at least not right away, like Aunt Mig or my friend Kip, to be your ride or die partner for a short time. Reminds me of another friend of mine. He said, John, let's build a raft. I'm pretty sure my dad has some old tires in the back of his shop. This other partner of mine, before I found Kip, was Will. This much cooler than me guy taunted me with this idea one day while we were running around our neighborhood and bored to tears. Will convinced me that walking a few miles along the railroad tracks to get old tires and roll them back would only take a couple of hours. But it took more than that, and it got dark, and I was in a bit of trouble by the time I got home that night. And the raft? Well, the raft never made it past the pile of old tires in the backyard stage, and it never saw any water, but it was still a fantastic adventure. Will was pretty awesome. He had every Matchbox and Hot Wheels car and the cool carrying boxes to store them in. We'd construct long ramps and jump the cars along the hallway in his parents' home. We would also jump ditches on his enduro dirt bike. Well, to be more specific, he would jump the ditches and I would hang on for dear life. If we'd been able to stay in that house longer than a year or so, Will and I might have been true lifelong friends, and we may have gone on many adventures as kids. Instead, we ended up on the same block 20 years later when we were new parents, and we have been lifelong friends ever since. Nowadays, we go on adventures with our wives and adult kids and try to channel as much of those lost years of goofiness into every second we spend together. Now, shortly after I left Will's neighborhood, I met someone named Reggie. And he said, "John, have you ever fried squirrel? It's good, I promise." That is what Reggie told me one day, right before he shot a squirrel with his pellet gun and fried it up in his mom's frying pan full of Crisco for us to eat. Will was only a year or so older than me, but always felt so much more grown up. Reggie now, like my aunt, Reggie was also much older than me. And looking back, I have no idea if he was a teenager or an adult. I was something like 11 or 12. We were in yet another apartment. I think it was our apartment, not my grandma's. It could have been my grandparents'. The line blurred over the years. But besides being older, Reggie, like Will, was cool. And we lived behind the local high school football stadium, around the corner from the funeral home. We got into all kinds of mischief, just like I did with Will. We lit things on fire, blew up firecrackers, and we ate squirrels. One of the cool things about Graham and my mom is that they did let me go on adventures like this with people like my aunt, Will, and Reggie. There was no cloistering back then, and staying inside, got to go out and have these adventures. And I'm not sure if that was to get me out of their hair and out of their adult conversations, or if they genuinely wanted me to explore the world. But they did let me roam, and that's how I found Kip. And that's how I found Reggie and Will even before Kip. We or they moved before I could ever become close to them like I did Kip. Looking back, Kip and I were not a very formidable pair. I sure could have used their protection from those bullies. My aunt definitely could have pinched them for me. After my childhood in New York with my aunt, the fleeting Florida adventures with the Wills and the Reggies were few and far between. As we traveled from house to apartment to house to apartment. These folks set me up so well for a world of play and partnership, and I was ready to recognize the possibilities when I did find Kip. One of the portals Kip and I used to escape reality to was what I basically called the woods. Running alongside the marina were some railroad tracks. And on the other side of those railroad tracks were some woods between that marina and the local hospital. The railroad tracks reminded me of my time with Will, but in the Will and John neighborhood, there was nothing but houses for miles and miles, and a park and a school, with a patch of woods here and there, near the marina, and Kip's railroad tracks. There were tens of acres of woods out by Kip's railroad tracks. Seemingly, those woods were placed there just so Kip and I could live out our most awkward versions of the Dungeons and Dragons modules we explored with dice and on notebook paper. We would make mock shields out of palm fronds, from leaves, and swords from palm branches and tree limbs. The woods were remarkable in another way, perhaps due to the uniqueness of the Florida landscape. It seemed to be almost like 4 or 5 sets of woods in one track. We had pine forest carpeted with dead brown and bleached pine needles so thick it resembled a blanket of snow on the otherwise marshy landscape beneath. We had a region with short palms, bramble bushes, and vines that didn't grow much higher than chest height. Perhaps this area had been burned and this stemmed from new growth. This area was like our version of a jungle. There were open fields that focused a full Florida plasma torch like sundown to bear on us, and dense Florida palms, pines, and oaks that blocked out the same star. Those woods weren't just a playground, they were a portal, a place where Kip and I could be warriors, explorers, and legends in our own right. Sunat, of course, despised it. He loomed at every tree line like a drill sergeant on inspection day, arms crossed, waiting to call us back to reality. When Kip and I turned the woods into our own fantasy realm, it was more than a game. It was a way to reclaim joy and freedom in a world that often felt beyond our control. As we ran through the woods, swinging palm branch swords and pretending we were elves and orcs, Stunad grumbled in the background. "What are you doing? This is dumb. Grow up." He always lurked, ready to remind me that play had an expiration date, that responsibility and worry were waiting just outside the tree line. But the colonel, he knew better, and I could almost hear him trying to whisper through the dungeon walls. "This isn't just a game, kid," he'd say, his voice steady, measured, like Colonel Troutman giving Rambo his final briefing before the battle. "This is training. This is how you learn to think fast, fight, and breathe when the world gets too heavy. Play while you can. Stay out just a little later. Run for 30 more minutes, because one day the mission changes and you'll wish you had." So, all in all, my sisters and I knew a dangerous world all too well, but play was also a part of our lives. They encountered even more dangers than I did along the way and had less time and privilege to play. We'll talk about that in the next chapter. Thank you for joining us. Uh, I'm looking forward to publishing this book in the summer of 2025. I'm hoping you're enjoying this audio edition. Have a great day. I want to see you soar.